Hello and welcome to another Innovation Explained video. Today we'll be continuing our series on idea management. Now, some of the most common questions that we get from customers revolve around the topic of measuring ideation and idea management. It's things like how should we approach measuring the whole process, what KPIs and metrics should we use, and so on. Well, in today's video, we'll help you understand the keys in this area. And of course, help you pick a set of KPIs that will tell you how you're doing at the moment and what to do to improve going forward. By the way, if you aren't yet familiar with idea management as a concept, please watch that video first. It will be linked on the screen and in the description below. But with that, let's get started. Let's start by discussing the elephant in the room. Most companies either don't really measure their idea management process at all, and even from the ones that are measuring it, most aren't really doing a very good job at it. Now, the most commonly used metrics in our industry are essentially just the number of new ideas, the amount of activity around those ideas, and the number of people participating in that process. Let's briefly cover why that's a bit of a problem. Ideas are everywhere, everyone has them, and most of those ideas are actually pretty bad. So the real challenge isn't again about the ideas or the activity around them. It's about finding the best ideas from the mass and then turning those into something tangible that creates real value. And trying to understand and measure that process is obviously pretty hard. Now, one of the big reasons for this is that there's very different kinds of ideas and innovations. There are quick and simple incremental ideas, and there are also those big ideas that could change the entire trajectory of the organization if they succeed, but that take a lot of time and money to implement and come with a big risk of failure. And another big one is simply the inherent risk and uncertainty involved in innovation. Put together, these mean that we do need to take a slightly different approach to measuring innovation than we do in many other parts of the business. So how should we then approach the topic? While you need to know how an individual idea or innovation is working to see if it makes sense to keep investing in it, that doesn't really help you to get better at innovation as an organization. There's just too many variables there to really draw any meaningful conclusions. So, to measure idea management, there are two key areas that you need to focus on: measuring your ideation portfolio and measuring your idea management processes. The first helps you give an idea of the big picture and to see if your efforts are actually helping move you in the right direction and leading to the outcomes that you're expecting. And the latter, in turn, helps explain why you're there and also helps you figure out how to improve going forward. Let's look at each of these in a little more detail. Let's start with the portfolio. So the basic idea here is that it represents total expected value of innovations you either have in your pipeline or the realized value from the ones you've already delivered. The value of this is pretty obvious. You can see how much value you've created in the past and are currently on track to deliver in the future. Changes in the projected value of your portfolio also help you spot trends and see if you're moving in the right direction. And by drilling down into the different business areas or types of ideas, you can figure out which ones are performing well and which ones aren't. Having said that, there are also some challenges with this approach. The first and most obvious is that forecasts for the estimated portfolio will always be inaccurate, and in some cases, wildly so. And because they're obviously easy to game, you shouldn't use this as a KPI that you use to measure the performance of teams or people. The second problem is that while it's pretty straightforward to measure the revenue or profit from new products, it's much more difficult and laborious to do so for other kinds of ideas like new features or services and process improvements, which in reality constitute the vast majority of your innovation portfolio. So only measuring new products is a bit problematic, but trying to analyze and keep track of value for the other types of ideas is also pretty impractical. But perhaps the biggest problem with portfolio value is that the realized values are a purely lagging indicator. And if you only collect those for new products, then it will often take multiple years for the good work that you're now doing to actually show up in the results. Let's then look at the process side of things. Process metrics help you understand how you're turning ideas into realized value, and they are leading indicators. It helps you show where you're doing well and where you might be struggling. For example, are you getting in enough ideas? Can you then turn those ideas into attractive concepts? How long is it taking you to turn those ideas into something that can be taken into use? By looking at the bottlenecks in your process, you can figure out ways in which you can improve the process, and that will then show up in your results down the road. However, while very powerful, process metrics aren't without challenges either. The obvious one is that just by looking at the process, you won't know if you're actually getting value from your investments in innovation. But the more nuanced one is that in a vacuum, process metrics can be very difficult to interpret. For example, is an average cycle time of 37 days good or bad? How big of a percentage of your ideas should you be able to implement? The problem is that there are no universal right answers there. For example, with incremental ideas, you want to implement as many of them as possible instead of spending too much time analyzing them. However, with big ideas, you shouldn't aim to implement most of them. It's actually much better to choose a few and execute those really well. So to make the most out of these process metrics, you need to deeply understand what you're doing and then see how your innovation capabilities evolve over time. By now, you've probably figured out the main point of this video. There isn't such a thing as the perfect metric or even a set of metrics to measure idea or innovation management. It's a difficult and nuanced and extremely context-dependent field, so you need to find the right set of metrics that works for your business. This will vary depending on your industry, the maturity of your reporting capabilities, and of course the goals you set for your idea management. It's those goals that you, after all, need to focus on moving towards. Having said that, we want to keep this video practical, so we'll wrap this up by sharing a few examples that we've seen work pretty well for many organizations and that you can use as the basis for building your own innovation scorecard. So, the most important thing to keep in mind is that whatever metrics you do choose, they should complement each other so that you can get a holistic view of your idea management activities. In my opinion, the best way to approach this is to choose a few metrics from each of these three categories. Input metrics give you a picture of what you're putting in your idea management funnel. These are obviously leading indicators and they can be helpful in spotting many problems. The idea with these is again very simple. If there isn't enough input, you won't get much output from your process. Also, since input and activity are proxies for engagement, these can tell quite a lot about the overall processes and culture that you have in place. Still, more input doesn't necessarily mean more value, so in my opinion, these are the least important of the three. And that's where output metrics come in. They measure the value you get out of your process. Typically, these are financial metrics evaluated at the portfolio level, but there can also be more qualitative metrics here, like the number of implemented ideas or new products launched. And finally, our third bucket is system metrics. These represent the process itself and measure how that is working. This is the part that few innovators actually focus on, but that can really make a huge difference. Here, the throughput and cycle times for the process overall are the most important and commonly used metrics, but there are also many others. For example, looking at the throughput and cycle times for each part of your process separately can be eye-opening. I really can't stress the importance of these system metrics enough, since they are the best way to help organizations become better at innovation overall. We'll add some further reading in the description below in case you're interested in more details on that. Anyway, remember that the metrics you see here are just a starting point. Still, they are pretty useful and applicable for most and should be pretty straightforward to implement. And that actually brings us to our final point for today. Regardless of which metrics you choose, they need to be a key part of the way in which you operate. You can build a fancy report or dashboard and update it once a quarter, but if it's not a part of your day-to-day operations and actually used to help make decisions and improve the process, it isn't worth much. Here, a good idea management software like Viima can obviously help, since it does most of the heavy lifting for you so that you always have up-to-date data available and in a visualized format. Having said that, it's still your responsibility to choose the right metrics to focus on and to make sure that the right people use those to make decisions and to keep improving your idea management processes. And finally, remember that whatever you do in idea management should always help move the organization towards its strategic goals. So make sure idea management is an active contributor there. Anyway, as a quick plug, if you don't yet have a platform to help you with idea management, you might want to give Viima a try. Our basic plan is free for an unlimited number of users, and you can get started in minutes via the link in the description. But with that, we'll conclude our session for today. If you have any questions, please leave those for us in the comments below, and remember to subscribe to stay up to date. We'll see you again in the next one.